Hello to all, and it's been a little while since our last Don't Do This at Home video where we take apart some great watch movements with our good friend Peter Speake-Marin, also known as the Naked Watchmaker. So we've been through some pretty legendary movements, more or less pretty simple ones if one can say so, but nothing too simple, for instance with the Zenith El Primero. But today we're stepping up in terms of complexity, as Peter will deconstruct nothing less than a minute repeater. Yes, let's be slightly more challenging. And to do so, we went to visit Stephen McGonigle, an Irish independent watchmaker established in Switzerland since quite some years now. And this particular watch uses a minute repeater kit from Christophe Claret, a company that has provided many different brands with these kits, a real specialty of theirs. So in this special episode of our Don't Do This at Home series, well, we focus more on the repeater mechanism, the holy grail of all watchmaker, and a bit less on the timekeeping mechanism, though naturally all is linked, as you can imagine. So let's meet Peter and Stephen, and let's deconstruct this plus 300 component marvel.
Here is Stephen's wristwatch, which was commissioned by an American collector. The watch's name is Grail, and that is associated with the function of the watch, which is a minute repeater. Grail in Irish means music, and a minute repeater is a watch which will actually sound the time. There is a slider on the 9 o'clock side of the case, which when activated or when pulled down and then released, will then sound the time on two gongs which are inside the watch. And the wooden base which the watch is now sitting on is part of the presentation cabinet, which is actually then given with the watch. So I pulled the slider down. The watch is now set to 12:58. First of all, you have the hours, then the quarters, and then finally the minutes. The reason for the minute repeater, it was designed and built over 200 years ago in pocket watches and with different executions, with different systems, and it was designed prior to electricity so that the user would be able to learn the time without needing to light a candle. Today, it is representative of a very high level of watchmaking, because the mechanism is extremely complex. There are several hundred components used to be able to assemble it. They're all adjusted and finished by hand, even down to the tone or the sound of the gongs. They are adjusted, they are filed using diamond files by hand to achieve the tonality which the watchmaker, Stephen, actually desires. I've turned the watch over so that you can see the sapphire case back with the minute repeater movement through it. You have the two hammers which sound on the gongs, which go around the circumference of the movement, here and here. Sometimes there are other elements of watchmaking which I just feel I have to share. And in this case, what I would like to share is actually the presentation, the box which actually accompanies Stephen's watch. It's made from massive sycamore and mahogany with beautiful inlay. A single flush fitting button in front, and you open it up. And on the left-hand side, you have written in an early Irish writing called Own's McGonigle. And on the other side of the box, in Ohm, you have Ireland. Then you have the watch, which is laid in the center, everything with this beautiful leather background. And then you have the music base, the resonant board for the watch, so that you can actually place the watch and it will accentuate the sound of the actual repeater. Now we're going to start the deconstruction of the Grail. To put in context the amount of work that has gone into this watch, the actual project started 2 years ago. There are only 6 watches in total, which Stephen will produce. 4 are already made, and each one is a unique repeater. It's a unique piece. There are not 2 which have the same dial. There are subtle eccentricities between all of the watches. From the moment that Stephen actually starts to put the finished watch together, meaning the finished components together, which are hand engraved and decorated, it takes him between 6 and 8 weeks. The actual process of from the beginning of the process of machining, you can count easily 6 months. But as I said, it was from the beginning of the project, from point A to point Z, you're looking at 2 years of work and development. The case is made from 18 karat gold. The crown, like the inside of the box, has little slots cut away inside of it, which is associating to the ohm language. The green dial is made by another independent watchmaker, a Finnish watchmaker called Kari Voutilainen. It is engine turned and then lacquered on top. And then when you move the watch in different positions and depending on the light, it catches the light differently and gives a different aesthetic. The case back is held in place by 6 screws, and the whole case, even though it's a minute repeater, is water resistant. And that is made by having, in essence, 2 cases, an outer and an inner, but you'll see that in a little while. The first thing that I'll do is to remove the strap. Every part of the watch, from the case back to the movement, everything which has letters, any kind of writing or any kind of decoration, is all made by hand and engraved here in Switzerland in a little town called Lochler. Even the deployment buckle, the McGonigle name on it, is also engraved very, very beautifully by hand. You have the whole of the movement with all of the Irish style engraving. All of the engraving, as I said earlier, is all executed in Switzerland, but is designed in Ireland by Stephen's sister. There are 1 million round cases in the world, okay? And for a minute repeater, because of the design of the movement, it makes sense to follow the design of the case. But if you actually can see the profile of the watch, you have these very solid, very utilitarian, but very defined, sculpted shoulders, which actually help to define and make recognizable this particular watch compared to other brands and other watches out there. You combine that with the winding crown and the overall aesthetic, and you have a McGonigle watch. I'm now about to start to dismantle the watch. I will be using Stephen's own tools, because he's actually sharpened all the different screws, all the different screwdrivers, to associate with specific screws to make the whole process of assembling easier. And because there is so much time taken in taking apart and reassembling of the watch in the adjustment process, the actual retouching of the screwdrivers is actually very important and very practical to avoid Stephen slipping when the watch is assembled. It also facilitates my process of dismantling the watch. Okay, so the 6 screws are removed, and now we can access the actual watch. Gently lifting up the case, you have the case back with, before I look at the watch, so you have the seal which renders the watch water resistant on the inside. That seal pushes against the inside of the case back on the inside here of the case. And then you have the sliding system, which is here, which is spring loaded by a small spring which is set into the case here. And there is then a bar which traverses from one side of the outer case to the inner side of the case, which has a seal in it, ensuring that the movement is protected from any kind of condensation or water, insulating it. You have the bridges, which are in view here, all hand engraved, which are themselves unique in design, in form. And the engraving is executed, or the removing of the material to get this three-dimensional effect is made in Le Locle by hand. But then when the piece comes back to Stephen, all of the sections which are higher, these are actually polished by hand using the small pieces of wood like this with a special diamond paste to be able to take the basic material, which is called German silver or maishol, and then to be able to make it shine. If you tried doing it by machine or micromotor, it would then touch other parts of the bridges of the engraving. So Stephen spends days and days, once the actual engraving is complete, to be able to actually polish all of those surfaces which you see catching the light. Balance cock at the bottom in the form of a bird's beak, a bird's head. You have the beak holding the shock protection here, and then the screw forms the eye. And then the form of the bird, or the symbol of the bird, is then reproduced in various areas on the bridges. Now, the next thing we do is we're going to remove the gongs and then loosen the 3 screws which hold the movement inside of the case. Top gong. And then you have the lower gong. So this is the foot, which is then screwed into place on the main plate. And then next to it, you have a section here which has been filed away using a diamond file, because the actual gongs are made from hardened metal, hardened steel. And the amount of material that you move from here will then, along with the length of the gong, dictate the sound that is given. The front of the watch has a different system. It's a compression system. It's pushed in place, and there's a seal around the material, making sure that it remains water resistant. But there are no screws. So to remove it, we are going to use the following tools.
Hammer.
We're going to use a hammer. Okay. There are different processes, and as crude as this may seem, this is the way that is actually recommended by the case company that produces the case. And the case is a very complex case. Producing cases in general has been, especially with all the different types of technology available, is much easier today. But making a case for a complication like a minute repeater is actually really, has lots of unseen idiosyncrasies and complexities. So, as crude as this may seem, it's actually a very effective way to be able to remove the bezel, and safely. Stephen is going to do the positioning, and then I am going to do the tapping. The actual punch is made from a material called Delran. Okay, are you ready?
Yeah.
You there? I felt like something moved.
Did it?
So Stephen has just loosened the bezel of the KO. Now we're able to gently lift it off and place it to one side. And then you see the dial and the hands. And the next step is to remove the hands. So put the hands to 12 o'clock, so one is directly above the other. This shows a level of detail that Mr. Stephen McGonigle goes through. If you turn it over, you see that part of it is blue, and that is because that is steel. It's blued steel, so it's hardened steel, which has a little bit of flexibility into it, and then the end, the actual pointed section, is made of white gold. then when you turn it over, you have a nice effect. He's straight grained the arrowhead, angled the edges, and then you have this rounded steel hand. All of that to make a hand. And that's all finished by hand. And it's assembled and riveted together by hand. So now, to be able to remove the movement, we've loosened up the casing screws. Next thing is to remove the stem. So the stem is held in place by one screw, which is here. Just undo it a little bit. It doesn't have to come out. It can't come out. And then we pull out the stem. And now you have the movement. There you have the dial, free from the movement. And then gently screw back in the dial screws. And now you can, in essence, see the movement. There's a story associated to the balance cock and the balance. They're all unique. The design of the balance cock in the form of a crow's head or a bird's head here, with holding the shock absorber system upon which or within which the balance pivot. Stephen wanted to maintain a very clean aesthetic, so avoiding all of the conventional screws that you get which hold the balance in place or hold a racket in place for adjustment. And the result was this almost like tweezer-like or bird beak-like form. And then the end of the balance spring, and the balance spring is a Breguet overcoil. So that is another eccentricity, because you don't tend to find that all of the time today. It's actually something which is quite unusual. And the end of the balance spring is actually risen by hand in a form which is called a Breguet overcoil. And the balance wheel itself is actually unique to Stephen. You have 8 regulation screws here, made from stainless steel. Depending on the position of the slots, will affect the timekeeping of the balance. It alters the position of the mass on the outside of the balance wheel, because underneath those screws, part of them are actually cut away. The screws are not concentrically weighted. So the first thing that we're going to do is remove the balance cock. The finish on the balance cock is really super delicate. If we even touch it with conventional like brass tweezers, which are very soft material, we risk actually damaging it. So, because I'm afraid of actually marking it in any form, I've already loosened it. So there you have the balance cock. You can see the main plate with all of the train bridges on. And again, you can see now cleanly the 2 hammers, which then hit onto the gongs which surround the movement. Now, we're going to turn the watch over. One of the elements which Stephen's used when making the watch, or other things that he hasn't used, is that everything, all the bridges and the levers are left in their native material without actually being plated. So the bridges and the main plate are made in German silver. They're all finished by hand, they're all decorated, but they're not plated, which gives this lovely green color, but it makes them very, very delicate. In the caliber, there are close to 300 components. Everything that you see is finished by hand, assembled by hand, adjusted by hand. If I activate once again the operating lever at the bottom, you have the minute rack, which is this piece here, which strikes the minutes, which falls in to this central cam system, the minute cam here, with all the different steps. Each step gives you another minute. The further that the minute rack lands into the center, the closer to 14 minutes indication you have. So at the very top, there's 0, and then for every step down, you have an additional minute. Underneath the minute rack you have the quarter rack. The quarter rack lands on another rack system which is underneath the minutes. And the hours are controlled by a cam which is under this wheel, under this star wheel here. The further that piece penetrates into the cam, the more hours are then struck. One more time. Pushing it over. Racks are released. First of all, you have the hours which are struck over here. Then you have the quarters, and then finally the minutes. And then the minutes are, this is the minute rack, and then you have the minute trip here, which is then pushing onto the hammers on the other side. Okay, so I'm going to continue now to dismantle the minute repeater. I'm going to start by removing the minute wheel bridge. So the minute wheel and the minute wheel bridge. Very simple, satin finished. The angles are polished by hand, but if you actually pick up this piece, you could damage both the satin finish and the straight graining on the slides of the watch. You have a clearer view of the minute cam system in the center. This is the piece upon which the minute hand is pushed, and the hour wheel and the hour hand then in turn slide onto. One of the first parts that I'm going to remove, its English name I can't remember because I've been in this country for so long. In French it's called the sautoir de surprise. It is the lever which you find here, activated on by this spring. And this whole section, when the operating lever is actually activated, it allows this beak here to then enter into the minute cam, and it pushes a piece which is called the surprise piece, which is underneath, which if you can see that, which is now moving, it's spring loaded. The function for this component is to ensure that when you have no minutes, the minute rack doesn't land on the first minute, so that you have silence. So if it's 9 o'clock, it is purely 9 o'clock. This lever, or this surprise piece, is activated by this lever, pushed over to one side, and then the rack will then land on the very end of it. This is necessary because of the geometry of the minute cam. Without that surprise piece, you will never have effectively 0 minutes, or 0 minutes for a period less than 60 seconds. So we start by taking off the spring. Spring number 1. Then the transmission piece, which then links the sautoir de surprise to the main operating lever. Okay. And there you have what is in French is called the sautoir de surprise, which activates the surprise piece on the central assembly, the minute wheel assembly, the minute cam assembly. This bridge with a large red ruby set in the center, this houses underneath it, or this holds in place, the mainspring, which is wound up by this lever as you wind up the repeater. And in turn, it drives all the racks and all the mechanism underneath it to sound the repeater mechanism. It's very fine, but there's a little braking system just here, which controls the depth of, there's a small lever and a star wheel, or like a little escape wheel here, and depending on how far that screw is moved, will dictate the amount of depth that the little lever next to it can actually penetrate the star wheel. And that is how the speed of the repeater is controlled. It's one of the ways. Another element to the caliber which makes it really quite special and quite unique. I mentioned at the very beginning the overall aesthetic of the bridges, but the reason they're unique is that all of the bridges look as though they are one. So you have the repeater mainspring bridge, center bridge, the escape bridge, barrel bridge, and the lever, the repeater lever bridge, and they all look like they are one piece, but in fact they're all separate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you have 5 separate bridges that give the impression of being one. Now, because the bridges are so delicate, I loosen them with a steel screwdriver, and now I'm going to remove them with what is effectively a toothpick which has been sharpened so that the screws can then be removed. When the bridge is in place, it looks as though it is part of the overall assembly. When you loosen it and you remove it, then you see that it is actually separate. So I'm going to finish there. I'm not going to dismantle any more of the piece. Under the central bridge, you have the center wheel. Under the barrel bridge, you have the barrel and the ratchet wheel. One of the nice things with that is that you have what is called wolf teeth gearing. So historically, it was one of the strongest forms of teeth that you could actually find within a watch. So it's a little feature, rarely found today, but it's a really nice touch. And all of the teeth that are on it are also angled, so it's a really nice level of quality. There you have the Kyol minute repeater, made by Stephen McGonigle, who is one of the new generation of independent watchmakers, and one of the very few Irish watchmakers to exist today. So thank you very much, Stephen, for the opportunity to be able to visit yourself, your atelier, and your work, and thank you for the wine.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed this and that you understand a bit more the complexity and intricacy of the repeater mechanism. All the very best to you, thanks for watching, and see you real soon. Viva chiming watchmaking!